my grandfather's longtime attorney, Mr. Harrison, stood up during the solemn gathering in our family's living room, immediately following the funeral service that had brought together distant relatives, lifelong friends, and business associates to pay their final respects to the patriarch who had built our family's fortune from nothing and had been the anchor of stability and wisdom for 3 generations of descendants who looked to him for guidance and support throughout their lives. I expected to hear the standard reading of a will that would distribute his substantial assets among the family members who had been closest to him during his 89 years of life, filled with remarkable achievements and generous love for those who earned his respect and affection. The black-clad mourners who filled every chair and corner of the spacious room where we had gathered for countless family celebrations and important announcements over the years created an atmosphere of grief and reverence that seemed appropriate for honoring the memory of a man who had touched so many lives through his business success, community involvement, and personal relationships that had been built on foundations of integrity, hard work, and unwavering commitment to family values that had shaped our understanding of what it meant to be worthy of his name and inheritance. Instead of the straightforward legal proceeding that everyone anticipated, Mr. Harrison's announcement that there's another heir sent shockwaves through the assembled family members who had assumed they knew everything about my grandfather's life, his relationships, and his intentions for distributing the considerable wealth that he had accumulated through decades of successful business ventures and careful investments that had created financial security for multiple generations of descendants who had never questioned their understanding of family history and bloodline. Connections. The moment when my sister Victoria screamed, "It couldn't be me!" in a voice filled with panic and desperate denial revealed not only her immediate understanding of the implications of Mr. Harrison's words, but also exposed secrets about our family's past that had been carefully hidden for decades through elaborate deceptions and coordinated lies that had protected certain family members from knowledge that might have changed their understanding of their own identity and place in the complex web of relationships that connected us all through bonds of blood, marriage, and shared history that was apparently far more complicated than any of us had ever imagined. The funeral service that had preceded this shocking revelation had been a magnificent tribute to my grandfather's extraordinary life and the countless ways he had influenced and inspired the people who had been fortunate enough to know him personally or benefit from his business acumen and generous philanthropy that had supported educational institutions, healthcare facilities, and community development projects throughout our region for over 40 years of active involvement in causes that mattered to him because of his own humble origins and deep appreciation for the opportunities that America had provided to an immigrant son who had transformed himself from a poor farm worker into one of the most respected and successful businessmen in our state. The elegant flower arrangements that had filled the sanctuary of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, where our family had worshipped for 3 generations, included white lilies, red roses, and greenery that created a beautiful and dignified setting for the ceremony that had drawn over 400 mourners who came to honor a man whose influence had extended far beyond his immediate family into the broader community, where his name was synonymous with business excellence, charitable giving, and the kind of personal integrity that had earned him respect from competitors and colleagues who recognized his exceptional character and commitment to ethical practices in all his professional and personal dealings. The eulogy that my father had delivered with visible emotion and carefully chosen words had painted a picture of my grandfather as a loving patriarch who had worked tirelessly to create opportunities and security for his children and grandchildren, while never forgetting the struggles and hardships that had motivated his relentless pursuit of success and financial independence that would protect his family from the poverty and uncertainty that had characterized his own childhood in rural Georgia, where his parents had struggled to survive as sharecroppers during the Great Depression years that had tested the resilience and determination of millions of American families who faced economic devastation and social upheaval that threatened their basic survival and future prospects. The stories that my father had shared about my grandfather's journey from farm worker to business owner had emphasized his exceptional work ethic, his innovative thinking, and his ability to recognize opportunities that others overlooked, while building relationships based on trust and mutual respect that had been essential for his success in industries where reputation and personal connections determined who received contracts and investment opportunities that could make the difference between success and failure in competitive markets where many talented people never achieved their potential because they lacked the combination of skills, determination, and luck that had enabled my grandfather to build his empire from modest beginnings. The business empire that my grandfather had created over the course of his adult life had included real estate developments, manufacturing companies, and investment portfolios that had generated enormous wealth while providing employment for thousands of workers and contributing to economic growth and community development in multiple states, where his companies had established operations and created lasting value for shareholders, employees, and local communities that had benefited from his commitment to responsible business practices and social responsibility that had guided his decisions even when those choices required sacrificing short-term profits for long-term sustainability and ethical consistency. The real estate developments that formed the foundation of his wealth had transformed underutilized agricultural land into thriving residential and commercial communities that had provided affordable housing and business opportunities for working families while generating substantial returns for investors who had trusted his vision and expertise in identifying properties with development potential that others had dismissed as unsuitable or unprofitable due to location challenges or zoning restrictions that he had successfully navigated through patient negotiation and creative problem-solving. The manufacturing companies that had expanded his business portfolio beyond real estate had focused on producing high-quality consumer goods and industrial equipment that had earned reputations for reliability and durability, that had enabled them to compete successfully against larger corporations with greater resources but less commitment to customer satisfaction and product excellence, that had been hallmarks of every business venture that carried my grandfather's name and reflected his personal standards for quality and service that had been instilled in every manager and employee who worked for companies that he owned or controlled through majority stock ownership and active involvement in strategic planning and operational decision-making. The investment portfolios that had provided additional diversification and income streams had been managed with the same careful analysis and conservative approach that had characterized all his business decisions, focusing on companies with strong fundamentals and ethical leadership, rather than pursuing speculative opportunities that might have generated higher returns, but would have created unacceptable risks to the financial security that he was building for future generations of family members who would inherit not only his wealth, but also the responsibility for managing and preserving assets that had been accumulated through decades of hard work and careful stewardship that had consistently prioritized long-term value creation over short-term gains that might have compromised the stability and sustainability that he considered essential for protecting his legacy. The family relationships that had been central to my grandfather's identity and motivation throughout his business career had always appeared to be straightforward and clearly defined, with my father and his two brothers serving as the primary heirs who would inherit equal shares of the business empire, while my sister Victoria and I, along with our cousins, would receive smaller but still substantial inheritances that would provide financial security and opportunities for pursuing our own career goals and personal interests, without the pressure of having to maintain or expand the family business empire, if our talents and inclinations led us in different directions that might be more fulfilling and appropriate for our individual personalities and ambitions. The close relationship that Victoria had always enjoyed with our grandfather had been a source of pride and sometimes jealousy among family members, who recognized that she had inherited his business acumen and strategic thinking abilities in ways that made her a natural candidate for eventually taking over leadership responsibilities within the family companies, despite traditional preferences for male succession that had characterized previous generations of family business ownership and management. Victoria's MBA from Wharton and her successful track record in managing regional operations for one of our grandfather's manufacturing companies had demonstrated her competence and dedication in ways that had earned his respect, and increasing involvement in strategic planning and decision-making processes that had positioned her as the most likely successor to his role as chairman and CEO of the holding company that controlled all family business interests. The assumption that Victoria would be the primary beneficiary of our grandfather's will had been so widely accepted within our family that her reaction to Mr. Harrison's announcement about another heir seemed completely understandable, as shock and disbelief that her expected inheritance might be threatened by the existence of someone whose identity and relationship to our grandfather had been completely unknown to everyone present at the reading. Despite our belief that we understood all the important relationships and connections that had shaped his life and influenced his decisions about wealth distribution and family legacy preservation that had been topics of discussion and speculation for years among relatives who had naturally been curious about their potential inheritances and future financial security. The specific wording that Mr. Harrison had used in announcing the existence of another heir had been carefully chosen and deliberately ambiguous, creating confusion and anxiety among family members who were struggling to understand whether this mysterious person was a previously unknown child, grandchild, or some other relative whose existence had been kept secret for reasons that might involve scandal, embarrassment, or complicated legal and financial considerations that had required discretion and privacy to protect family reputation and business interests that could have been damaged by public revelation of unconventional relationships or circumstances that might not conform to social expectations and traditional family structures. The reaction that my sister Victoria had displayed upon hearing about another heir had been immediate and visceral, involving not just verbal denial but also physical signs of distress, including trembling hands, rapid breathing, and facial expressions that suggested she was experiencing something closer to terror than mere disappointment about potentially reduced inheritance amounts that would still leave her with substantial wealth and financial security, but might not include the complete control over family business operations that she had been expecting and preparing for throughout her adult career development and educational preparation for leadership responsibilities. The specific words that Victoria had screamed about it not being able to be me had created additional confusion and tension in the room, because nobody understood why she would have any reason to think that I might be the mysterious heir whose existence had just been revealed, especially since my relationship to our grandfather had always been that of a beloved granddaughter who had received his affection and support, but who had never shown particular interest in or aptitude for business. Activities that would have made me a logical candidate for major inheritance responsibilities or leadership roles within the family companies that required specific skills and experience that I had never developed or demonstrated through my career choices and educational background in social work and nonprofit management. The professional background that I had developed in social services and community development work had taken me in directions that were quite different from the business and financial focus that had characterized my grandfather's career and the family companies that had been built around real estate development, manufacturing, and investment management activities that required expertise in areas where I had little knowledge or experience, despite having grown up in a family where business discussions and financial planning had been regular topics of conversation at family gatherings and holiday celebrations, where my grandfather had enjoyed sharing stories about his various business ventures and the lessons he had learned through decades of navigating competitive markets and economic challenges. The revelation that began to emerge through Mr. Harrison's carefully worded explanations involved complex family history and relationships that had been hidden from most family members for decades, through elaborate deceptions and careful management of information that had been designed to protect certain individuals from knowledge that might have been painful or socially complicated during earlier eras, when unmarried pregnancy and unconventional family structures carried significant stigma and could have damaged business reputations and social standing in ways that might have affected economic opportunities and community relationships that were important for business success and family prosperity. The specific details that Mr. Harrison began to reveal about my true relationship to our grandfather involved a secret that had been maintained by only 3 people for over 30 years, including my grandfather himself, my mother, and one other family member who had helped coordinate the arrangements that had been necessary to hide the truth about my parentage and family connections that had shaped every aspect of my upbringing and education, without my knowledge or understanding of the real reasons for certain decisions, and circumstances that had influenced my childhood experiences and family relationships in ways that I had never questioned or fully understood. The bombshell revelation that emerged from Mr. Harrison's careful explanation was that I was not actually my father's biological daughter, but was instead my grandfather's daughter, conceived during a brief affair between him and my mother that had occurred during a period of marital separation and emotional crisis that had temporarily driven my parents apart during the early years of their marriage, when they were struggling with infertility issues and relationship problems that had created opportunities for the kind of poor judgment and impulsive behavior that had resulted in consequences that would affect multiple generations of family members and required decades of careful deception and secret keeping to manage and contain. The elaborate cover-up that had been orchestrated to hide this scandalous family secret had involved my parents' reconciliation and my mother's decision to pass me off as my father's biological daughter, with the willing cooperation of my supposed father, who had been desperate to repair his marriage and start a family, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought about my conception and the complex emotional dynamics that had been created by knowledge that his wife had been intimate with his own father during their period of separation and marital crisis that had tested their commitment to each other and their ability to overcome the kind of betrayal and hurt that might have permanently destroyed their relationship and family prospects. The financial arrangements that had been made to support this deception had included secret payments and trusts that had provided for my education and living expenses throughout my childhood and young adulthood, without creating obvious connections to my grandfather that might have raised questions about his unusually generous support for someone who was supposedly just one of many grandchildren who were receiving similar assistance and attention from a patriarch who was known for his equal treatment of all family members and his careful approach to distributing wealth and opportunities in ways that would not create favoritism or resentment among relatives who were all competing for his attention and eventual inheritance consideration. The legal documentation that had been necessary to hide my true parentage had involved falsified birth certificates and medical records that had been created with the cooperation of healthcare providers and officials who had been convinced that this deception was necessary to protect the family from scandal and social consequences that could have damaged business relationships and community standing during an era when such revelations might have had far more serious implications for professional reputation and economic opportunities than they would today, when social attitudes toward unconventional family structures and relationships have become more tolerant and accepting. The will that Mr. Harrison was now reading contained provisions that had been designed to provide me with the largest inheritance of any family member, while also revealing the truth about my parentage that my grandfather had finally decided needed to be disclosed, despite the pain and family disruption that such revelations would inevitably create among relatives who had been living with false assumptions about family relationships and inheritance expectations for over 3 decades of carefully maintained deception and secret-keeping that had required constant vigilance and coordination among the few people who knew the truth. The specific terms of my inheritance included controlling interest in the family holding company, the primary residence and surrounding property, and investment accounts that represented the majority of my grandfather's personal wealth that had been accumulated through his business success and careful financial planning that had been motivated partly by his desire to provide security and opportunities for the daughter whose existence he had been forced to hide, but whose welfare and future success had been constant concerns throughout his life and business career, that had been shaped by his determination to create a legacy that would benefit her, even if their true relationship could never be publicly acknowledged. The documentation that Mr. Harrison presented to support these revelations included DNA test results that had been conducted secretly during my grandfather's final illness, along with detailed records of the financial arrangements and legal procedures that had been used to hide my true parentage and create the false family structure that had defined my understanding of my own identity and place in the family hierarchy for my entire life, until this moment when everything I had believed about myself and my relationships with family members was being revealed as elaborate fiction designed to protect everyone involved from social consequences and emotional trauma that had been considered unacceptable risks during the time when these deceptions had been created and implemented. The immediate aftermath of these revelations involved chaos and emotional upheaval, as family members processed the information and its implications for their own inheritance expectations and family relationships that had been built on false assumptions about parentage and family connections that had influenced decades of interactions and feelings about each other and their respective roles within the family structure that had suddenly been revealed as fundamentally different from what anyone had believed or understood about their own identity and place in the complex web of relationships that connected them all. Victoria's reaction to learning that I was actually her aunt rather than her sister, and that her anticipated inheritance had been dramatically reduced in favor of someone whose true relationship to our grandfather had been hidden throughout their lives, was a mixture of rage, disbelief, and bitter resentment that quickly escalated into accusations and threats that revealed the extent to which her identity and future plans had been built around expectations that were now being destroyed by revelations that she was completely powerless to change or challenge despite her feelings of betrayal and injustice. The confrontation that erupted between Victoria and me involved years of suppressed resentment and sibling rivalry that suddenly took on completely different meanings when viewed through the lens of our true family relationships and the secret favoritism that had apparently influenced many aspects of our upbringing and family interactions in ways that had created advantages for me that Victoria had never understood or been able to explain through normal family dynamics and parental preferences. The legal challenges that Victoria immediately began planning involved attempts to contest the will and challenge the DNA evidence on grounds that the revelations had been withheld until after our grandfather's death, when he could no longer be questioned about his intentions or the circumstances that had led to these unusual inheritance arrangements that seemed designed to punish family members who had not been involved in the original deception and who were now being asked to accept reduced inheritances because of decisions that had been made decades before their birth. The emotional trauma that these revelations created for all family members involved required professional counseling and therapy to process the complex feelings of betrayal, confusion, and loss that accompanied the destruction of family relationships and identity assumptions that had been central to everyone's understanding of their place in the world and their connections to each other through shared history and family bonds that had suddenly been revealed as far more complicated and fraught than anyone had ever imagined. The business implications of my unexpected inheritance included immediate challenges related to managing companies and investment portfolios that I had no experience or expertise in handling, creating the need for professional advisors and management teams that could provide guidance and support, while I learned about industries and financial strategies that had been completely outside my previous knowledge and career experience in social services and nonprofit work that had not prepared me for the responsibilities of overseeing a multi-million-dollar business empire. The community reaction to the public revelation of these family secrets and inheritance arrangements created additional stress and complications as business associates, employees, and social connections struggled to understand and respond to information that challenged their assumptions about family relationships and business succession plans that had been topics of speculation and discussion for years among people who had worked with or competed against companies that were now under my control, despite my obvious lack of qualifications and experience. Today, 3 years after that shocking day at my grandfather's funeral, when Mr. Harrison announced that there was another heir and my sister screamed that it couldn't be me, I have worked hard to honor my grandfather's legacy while building bridges with family members who were hurt and confused by revelations that changed everyone's understanding of our relationships and shared history in ways that required patience, forgiveness, and commitment to rebuilding trust and connection based on truth rather than the carefully maintained deceptions that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. The lesson that emerged from this experience is that family secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, ultimately create more problems and pain than the original circumstances they were designed to hide. And that truth, while initially devastating, provides the only foundation for authentic relationships and genuine healing from the trauma and confusion that result from decades of deception and carefully maintained lies that serve no one's genuine long-term interests. The relationship with Victoria has required extensive work and professional mediation to rebuild trust and connection based on our true family relationship as aunt and niece, rather than the sisterly bond that had been artificially created through decades of deception. But we have made progress toward understanding and forgiveness that has been aided by therapy and shared commitment to honoring our grandfather's memory, despite the pain and complexity of the circumstances he created through his choices and their long-term consequences. Looking back on that moment when the lawyer announced another heir and Victoria's scream revealed that she somehow knew it would be me, I understand that family secrets create suffering for everyone involved, and that my grandfather's decision to finally reveal the truth through his will, while initially traumatic, provided opportunities for authentic relationships and personal growth that would never have been possible as long as our family continued to live with the burden of deception and carefully maintained lies about our most fundamental relationships and connections to each other. Was my grandfather wrong to maintain this secret for over 30 years before revealing it through his will? Or should he have found the courage to tell the truth earlier when family members could have processed the information with his guidance and support? Should people have the right to make such life-altering decisions about inheritance and family relationships based on secret information that affects multiple generations of family members who have no knowledge of the circumstances that are shaping their lives and futures? Would you have preferred to learn the truth about your parentage and family relationships earlier in life, even if it meant growing up with different family dynamics and social circumstances? Sometimes the most devastating revelations provide opportunities for the most authentic relationships, when people have the courage to rebuild trust and connection based on truth rather than the comfortable lies that protect us from pain, but ultimately prevent genuine intimacy and understanding that can only develop when people know and accept each other completely, including the complicated circumstances and imperfect choices that shape every family's history and identity.